Okay, hello everyone. Do the propaganda here. Okay, hi everybody. Nice to have all you here. Thanks for. I'm really happy to be here today to talk a little bit about sustainability. The title is to make sustainability easier. I'm not sure that's even possible, but I'll do my best to kind of explain some of the key trends in sustainability and what's happening in the industry, and maybe we'll have time for questions at the end. Um, so what are the topics? First of all, how does business travel fit into the global sustainability experience, and how does that fit into the strategy of airlines, of agencies, and of large corporations who are driving much of this? The punchline for all of you is if sustainability is going to happen in air travel, it's going to be driven by business travelers. So all of us have the responsibility of making this happen because leisure travel is inevitably going to lag behind. Um, we need to think about what progress we really want to make this year, because one of the issues I want to point out with sustainability is it's all in the future. We're all going to do these things. It's like we're making commitments for future generations. And I love some of the airlines' commitments to 2050 net zero. None of the employees making those statements will work at that airline or in the industry at that point. So we're making a lot of promises on behalf of future employees that I really hope they step up to. Good luck for that. And then I want to talk a little bit about offsets, where we are with offsets, what's happening in the industry with offsets, which is kind of augmented by some of the things happening with NDC. I know NDC is not really a concern of anyone here, and you don't really talk about it too much at this conference, but we need to think about NDC and how that impacts the sustainability world as well. But really what I'm trying to get to is an integrated view that gives you, the corporate travel manager, or you, the TMC, the tools to be able to actually make a difference in the foreseeable future. I am interested in 2050. I wish everyone well. However, I'm more interested in 2024 and 2025, and I do think there are things we can do today that will have an impact. So first of all, what is the impact of travel? Depending on your point of view, you can look at this slide and have different views. My view is we're about 8% of the world's global emissions comes from travel, discretionary travel, which is air and business and leisure. Some people are like, it's only 8%, it's no big deal. 8% is a pretty big deal when you think about discretionary travel. Having lights on and heat in your house is probably not discretionary. Running factories to produce food is probably not discretionary. Going to Hawaii, depends who you are. Maybe it's not discretionary. But 80% of that emission that we as a collectivity, as an industry, create comes from air travel. Air is the majority. And I would also say air is lagging in terms of progress made. Cars probably had the most progress. Rail has actually had fewer than you think, but it started from a fairly sustainable base. And then hotel is a complete disaster. Not because hotels are necessarily wasteful, but because the measurement and explainability of hotel is very, very difficult. I don't know how to put a quantity around a dirty towel. I can think about water emissions and those types of things, but how we standardize and make all this explainable is quite difficult. But let's start with saying that it is a significant part of global emissions, and it's growing both in absolute terms and as a percentage. So from a business traveler's perspective, you look at that, say, okay, what can I do to help? And the answer is you can get really confused really fast if you'd like. We as an industry can help you with that. Everyone is trying to help. Everyone is putting different statistics together. Everyone has got different alternatives. You've got green leafs associated with certain hotel brands, for example. But how do you put all that together in a way that makes sense? Because what we have found, we've been doing sustainability reporting in our search results for 6 years in Europe, I think, so 7 years in Europe. And what we find is people look at it, they're like, wow, and everyone answers the surveys the same. I would change my entire travel experience to save the environment. And they book the cheapest, the cheapest and lowest duration flight every time. And guess what? When they get upgraded to first class, they're like, no, I don't want that because it's bad for the environment. They take the upgrade. And there's a question for all of us as business travelers, is that wrong? I mean, do you deserve a scarlet letter for taking an upgrade on a flight? Because according to every emissions calculator you will ever see in this industry, that is the worst thing you could possibly do is fly business class. So generally, the way that the reporting systems are working today is if you want to help the environment, be really, really uncomfortable for long periods of time. That's the way to solve it. And the more comfortable you are, and oh, God forbid you have like a beer or something on the plane, woo, man, you're just the worst person in the world. So we need to think about our incentive structures a little differently, because if we want people to contribute and believe in what we're doing and do the right thing, making them really uncomfortable and feel like crap isn't the right answer. So how do we get everyone who travels thinking about this continuously and doing things so we're all marching in the same direction? Because I think today there's a lot of divisiveness in the sustainability game. There's also a lot of weaponizing, where people are using it as a competitive tool. I don't think that's necessarily where we want to go. I think this is a community problem, and we need to create this as a community problem with community assets and work together, as opposed to saying, I'm greener than you because of whatever. So it's confusing for the agency. But we, as an industry, it's on us to fix this, because the average consumer will not understand any of this stuff. They can try, but it's quite complicated, as I'll mention in a minute. So it's our job to remove that complexity and to give them choices, pre-curated, that allow them to do the right thing easily without becoming experts, because most people don't have the time to become experts in travel sustainability. I didn't think when I started doing this 5 years ago that it was going to be this hard. I'm like, oh, come on. I mean, you can easily explain what the impact is of a flight or a hotel stay. It's actually a lot harder than you would think. So where are we today? The big news in the last year is there has been progress on standardization. And that has been my biggest issue, is that there's a lack of standards for how we explain carbon emissions to a subscriber. And in fact, a lot of companies would come to me 3 years ago and try to sell me their sustainability measurement system. And the story was always the same: accuracy. I'm the most accurate measurement possible. And I'm like, I don't care about accuracy. I care about standardization. I care about explainability. Whether I'm a half of an ounce off on the carbon emissions on the seat I was on in Air Canada yesterday, I don't care. I care about the direction that we're trying to move people. And when people come and say, I can give you my proprietary measurement system, but I can't tell you how it works because it's my intellectual property, I'm like, get out of here. I want to understand exactly how it is you're calculating this, and I want the whole world to understand it. So standardization is really important. We are members of the Travelist Coalition, which is an open source organization. There's many people in it now. I won't mention certain royalty who's in it as well. But anyway, a bunch of us are in it, and we publish the standards. It's wide open how it's calculated. Anyone can use those measurements. And we have debates around issues like, should it be class of service based? Because right now, the way the Travelist system works and all of the open source systems are on square inches occupied in the air. That is the primary metric. So again, occupy fewer space, you're good. Occupy more space, you're bad. That's not the right measurement, because there's other way more impactful things that we can do in the short term. The second is rail. Right now, rail and air are not integrated at all in any realistic way. Air is treated as a separate thing, as is rail, as is hotel, as is whatever mechanism you use to get to the train station. So taking a gas-guzzling SUV to the train station to take a train isn't necessarily good. So how can we make all of this stuff work together? And then finally, how do we track it? How do we give reporting to you as the TMC or the corporate travel manager so you can see what your progress is and measure that progress? So that's kind of what happened last year. We expect this to continue going forward, and I'll talk about each of these things, but integration of air and rail, standardizing the reporting process, getting some clarity on offsets and what you want to do with offsets and the whole concept of offsets, and then finally, leveraging search results so that you, the travel manager, can change the search results to elevate sustainable options and suppress non-sustainable options. That's really the core to all of this, is letting subscribers see options that are environmentally valuable. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the data side and what's going on there. So I mentioned the Travelist Coalition. The EU Ecolabel is both good and bad. Right? So it's going to standardize reporting on flights that take off or land in Europe, but it won't standardize everything else. And I'm afraid there'll be different regional standards and different applicability of the Ecolabel, which could be an issue. Hotel certification, as I mentioned, is the Wild West. It's currently built on a self-policing system. So hotels self-police and self-report. Typically, when you grade your own homework, you always get an A. So I would think that it would be good if we had mechanisms that allow people, because the self-reporting mechanism is you follow some pretty simple guidelines around emissions. Most of it relates to water use. And then the hotel says, I'm good. And then you get put on the good list. So there's got to be a mechanism that's a little more objective to be able to determine what hotels are doing what, because there's a wide variation in hotel behaviors related to CO2 emissions. So let's start with the first part of this, which is explaining to a user at the time of purchase. Now here's one of the tricks is when someone purchases a flight, they may not even know the equipment type or a lot of details around the emissions because it may be 6 months, a year out. So we have to influence the traveler when they're making the decision, not afterwards. So we have to, in the search results, while they're looking for flights, they're going to look at duration, they're going to look at connecting airports, they're going to look at the airline they like, they're going to look at upgrade possibilities, they're going to look at price, they're going to look at all these things. And somewhere in that mix of decision criteria, we want to put carbon emission data. So again, we started this, and we started this 6 years ago, and what we put is the raw emissions data. This is an example from Google Flights. I'll show you Travelport One in a minute. But you can see what they're doing. 618 kilograms of CO2. What the hell does that mean? I mean, is that good or bad? I mean, how do you judge that? And so we started by displaying raw CO2 numbers. We realized they mean nothing to anybody. So then we had the bright idea of putting comparative matrices. So it's really this, in Google's case, you'll see it's a green or a red plus or above the mean. So this particular case, the flight on the top, is 17% better than the mean. So basically, I'm better than all the junk. I mean, it's like, how do you put context into 17% of what? So basically, you took an unexplainable, ununderstandable thing, and you compared it to all the other unexplainable, understandable things, and that made it sensible somehow. So, okay, so thanks for that. And I think this is progress because this does help the 0.0001% of us who understand it. It's the 99.9999 that don't understand it that I want to figure out. So we've done this as well in search displays, and what we're looking to do is move to a simple system based on a 1 to 5 scale. But again, like how does that, if I'm only a 4, if it's the equivalent of choosing a 4-star hotel versus a 5, is a 4 Greenleaf versus a 5. What does this all mean to a traveler? And I'm coming to the conclusion that while explaining it is important, there also may be a model where we let experts make decisions or help influence the decisions on behalf of the user because they look for us to do that. They want us to do it. So if they want to opt into a program that says, I recommend this from an environmental perspective, that's probably better than letting them sort through 100 different flights with a bunch of green and red on it that means absolutely nothing to anybody. Now, this is our system, and I'm going to criticize my own company and criticize all of us in the industry. So first of all, if you go back to the previous one, all right, so all I got is a raw emissions number, and it's blended in with a whole bunch of other information. And I'm a normal person. I'm looking at price first. That's the one that pops, right? And then duration and how many, how many stops and how long I got to wait and all that stuff. And then I get to my do-gooder thing at the end. So how can we elevate the do-gooder thing to the beginning? So when you look at this emissions data on our system and you say, well, I don't know about this 67 kilograms of carbon. What does it mean? Well, what it means is we pop up this handy explainer with all these words. So the layman, average person who's not really busy, I'm just like searching for travel 8 hours a day, with nothing else to do. So I'm going to read all of this detail about what this means and what the Travelist Coalition is and what happened to Prince Harry and what's going on in Montecito, all this other stuff. So again, we can provide tons of detail, and you all live this every day because the same issue existed with branded fares. The same thing is going to exist when you're an American Airlines flyer and you want to know if you're getting frequent flyer credit or not. This is how you're going to find out, through these long drill downs and complex explanations. So I think this is important that we do this, but I don't necessarily expect this particular drill down to change the education levels of the masses in North America. So we need to find a better way to do that, and one word of that in my mind is standards. If we all say the same thing, and we're all working from the same hymn sheet and the same score sheets, we can make progress because familiarity starts to help. But right now, my system for explaining it here is different from some other system, which is different by TMC. Many of the large TMCs especially have their own programs with their own logic. So there's the first part of this, before you can even do anything, is explaining and understanding what the impact of travel is. And as you can see, that's not nearly as easy as we thought. But standardization, I think, is important. Please don't use proprietary systems if you can avoid it. Use standards like Travelist and reporting system based on open source standards. That's my first thing. The second thing is achieving consistency, because in the end, most corporate travel managers are trying to measure the impact of their policies so those can be used for tax credits and other types of things. So first of all, you've got the airline view. Airlines tend to measure things on a fleet basis. That's their preference, is say, my fleet is green, this individual plane in that seat's not so good, but the larger picture. Whereas in travelers, we care about the individual flight that they're taking, and there literally is a difference between the 3 p.m. and the 5 p.m. from Toronto to Los Angeles. Literally, there's a significant difference, and I'll explain why in a second. The last part, though, is reporting. So how do we take the data that we put into search results, then put that into the point of sale at the time the flight is selected, and then give you, the corporate travel manager, the reports that allow you to continue to invest? Because one of my concerns here is we have to collectively contribute. One of the way this has worked so far in the airline industry is what we do in travel is we sit here and complain to the airlines they need to do more. You need to do more. You need more SAF. You need more of this. Call us when you've got it. That's not the right approach. We have to contribute. I would like to contribute. I'm willing to pay more for a sustainable flight, but I need to understand what it is, and I don't want to spend 6 hours looking for it and reading those horrible drill downs like the ones that I wrote, because they don't help, right? So how can we get consistency and standardization in the process? All right, so once you've done that, and you now understand, I understand everything about travel's impact on sustainability. Now what do I do about it? And if you've been following sustainability at all for the last 2 years, it inevitably comes to SAF. In the end, you're going to get a big explanation of SAF, which is sustainable air fuel, right? And sustainable air fuel, I'd say this in a nice way, it doesn't exist. Other than that, it is really, really helpful. It's still early in the process. There are many different types of SAFs, but SAF is meant to be a non-carbon emission fuel type. It can be, but there's no standardization or agreement on how it will be made. It can be made by corn or various waste. There's schemes that use used baby diapers or all kinds of weird stuff. So how we're going to produce all of this SAF is a really interesting question. But today, it is a whopping half of 1 percentage point of the fuel that is created. And one of the challenges you have with SAF is it has to be manufactured within 10 miles of the airport by which it is used, or else the cost of transporting it to the airport blows away any of the benefits you have from doing it. And by the way, it still does burn. It doesn't burn carbon in traditional fossil fuel sense, but it does still have a mission of its own. So SAF is the thing that you will hear most commonly, and there are many airlines who have built their entire strategy around SAF. There's many TMCs that talk about it all the time. But what I will say about SAF is, most of the schemes that you sign up for, you're going to pay, let's call it $20 today, and they'll use SAF on a plane 10 years from now. That's what you're paying for. And in general, that's one of the big foibles of sustainability, is we're investing in future things. And that's a hard sell to a user when you say, give me $20 today, and 5 years from now, I'll offset 2% of your flight. And that's, so getting critical mass behind SAF is going to be difficult because of the lag between short-term expediency and long-term goals. We need to move to SAF. We need to have SAF available at all airports. We need to have a sustainable, cheap way of doing it, because right now the cost of a gallon of SAF is about 10x that of traditional fossil fuel. So you pay more, it costs more investment, and you can't even get it if you want it. Other than that, it's really having an impact. But SAF is actually an improvement over what was the common regime up until 2023, and that was carbon offsets. So carbon offsets were the norm. Many, I think I have some stats on this right here. So many entities, airlines like Delta, I'll pick on them, I'll pick on Alphabet, who always talks about how sustainable they are, Disney, Salesforce, their strategies still are heavily based on carbon offsets, which at the time were essentially plant-a-tree schemes. Give me some money, I'll go plant trees, and you would need to plant more trees than 5 times the Earth's surface just to do Shell's offset plan alone. So what's happened is many consumers have become skeptical of offset programs because they perceive them to be scams. Now, one of the reasons they perceive them to be scams is that they're scams. I mean, that is the reason. We are paying for things that literally do not exist, that are not measurable, that cannot contribute to the problem we're solving. And then you got into a whole bunch of controversy around other types of offset programs that have nothing to do with the flight you're on. This is an interesting question because Ryanair's famous for this. They have a bunch of programs to protect dolphins in Ireland. Nothing to do with air fuel, but it is an environmental contribution. Is that bad? I don't think it's bad. I think it's good. I think you should be contributing to things that help the environment, not necessarily pretending that you can literally give $5 and the whole flight is erased like it never happened. Just use $5 to get drunk and forget about it because it has more impact on the world than what you're doing. So that's why I want to make sure that we are clear to users about what they're getting and what the benefits are of that. And one of the things that's made this worse is NDC. Again, I'm sure in this conference you've heard all the great things about NDC, how it's flawless, execution has been amazing, it's made everyone happy, American Airlines hasn't done anything weird, none of that. It's all awesome. So the one bad thing about NDC is it's really confusing the issue on environmental sustainability because all the airlines have their own custom programs and they are demanding or politely asking for them to be offered as part of NDC. As part of the customized bundle, I know you care about the environment, so I'm going to give you a special offer that's different than what I'm giving the person who hates the environment. Just the flaw in that argument itself should be apparent to you. But right now, each of the airlines has their own variation. Probably the most well-known one is Air France-KLM, who has 3 versions of SAF bundles that they offer you as part of NDC. The first one is mandatory by the French government. It's a tax. The second is mandatory by Air France that everyone must pay. It's €1, €1.50. Then if you want to go to the gold standard, you pay another €5. And if you want to be really, really good, you pay €20. Now, the difference between those 4 programs is, so the difference between those 4 programs is, I don't know the difference. No one knows the difference, and no one can explain the difference. So new distribution capability creates this problem. And what I've decided to do we're a search company, right? So what I've decided to do is not pass through any airline offsets at all. We're suppressing them. If you want to buy an offset directly from the airline or a SAF contribution, you can. But the reason we're doing that is, first of all, I want to believe in and stand behind anything that I'm putting into my search results. The integrity of search results matters. And if you're going to manipulate them or change them based on some individual company, then I have to go police 400 airlines, and I don't want to do that. The bigger issue, though, is consistency. You got to put things in front of consumers that they see and understand. And if we're all doing it slightly different, Ryanair's saving the whales, and United's doing the special fund, and American's doing what American's doing, how are you supposed to make this consumable by a user? So think about, from a TMC perspective, what your stance is, and if you want your individual consumers choosing airline-specific offerings or not. So again, offsets, I think, are becoming rapidly illegal. I think I'm going the wrong way here. And they're going to be not used in Europe shortly. So we need to think about new ways of doing this. The 2 ways that are common are SAF funds, and the other big one you're going to hear a lot about is carbon capture. So carbon capture essentially uses giant turbines to produce wind tunnels that then remove carbon from the atmosphere, put it into essentially to tubes, and inject those tubes deep into into the earth. And most of this is done in places like Iceland, because in Iceland there's geothermal power that help power the turbines. And the only problem, though, I was getting an explanation of this one time, and someone said, these are very stable ways of capturing carbon. The only thing that could possibly unlock it is a volcanic eruption. And I'm like, isn't Iceland a volcano? And isn't that where you're putting all of this carbon? And they're like, oh yeah, but don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And then the next thing was, if you give us $1 million today, we'll start to remove carbon in 2029. And the cost of removing an average air flight, let's say from Toronto to Los Angeles, the cost is about 5x the cost of the ticket. So it's not really an easy sell. Say, you paid $500 for a ticket. Well, for an extra $2,000, we'll take away the carbon emissions. That's not what users want. They want that easy airport thing where you put $1 in a little jar and it all goes away. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We have to find ways to invest in these things. And so where we are today, SAF, I just said the word SAF more in the last half hour than has actually been used in any airplane this month. So we have a long way to go to incentivize production, to localize that production, to agree on standards for how it is used, and then also not greenwash the results, because SAF is an improvement. It's a very serious improvement, but it doesn't produce zero emissions. It still has negative impacts on the environment. So that was not the most inspirational way of telling you should care about the environment. And SAF is important. Carbon capture is promising, though it has its limits, especially if you're doing it on volcanoes. But there are two things you can do today, and the most important is age of aircraft. So the age of aircraft has a dramatic impact on the carbon emissions with fossil fuel of that plane, because of the age determines the weight in terms of the material that is used and the aerodynamics associated with that plane. So we have to incent airlines to retire older aircraft, to invest in newer aircraft, and to do that with our help, because we're directing our dollars towards those flights and those planes that are the most sustainable. And while that may not get us to net zero, it will get us to a much better place than we are today, and it will eliminate unnecessary waste in the system. So, and we should not force airlines to modernize their fleets without our help. We should be directing our dollars to the airlines that have the most modern fleets and who have coherent plans to upgrade and modernize their aircraft. I think it's great that they're investing in SAF funds. I think it's great they're investing in carbon capture. I don't think it's great they're lying about planting trees. But these are the things we can do in the short term. And we need to start thinking about aircraft fuel optimization and fuel use beyond SAF as we move towards it. So who's going to pay for all of this? So there's voluntary purchases. And again, my one thing about voluntary purchases, they should be real. If you're purchasing something, you should actually get something. So if you're giving $100, you should get $100 worth of contribution. There are surcharges. These are going to be common. They already exist in France and in Germany and in Holland. I expect all of Europe will have surcharges, mandatory government-induced surcharges. US probably less so. And then these bundled offers like AFKL has that allows you to treat sustainability just like a Wi-Fi purchase or anything else, or a meal purchase on a plane. So these things are all great starts, but I think these are not the right answer. Who's going to pay for this is all of you, because the corporate travel manager is the one that has the power to be able to take corporate budgets and direct those into areas that are fruitful. And then you could use that for your own D&I programs and for government credits, tax credits like we have in the United States, for example. So that's where this goes. These are important, don't get me wrong. And surcharges, the role of government in all of this is a debatable and interesting conversation. But the role of the corporate travel manager is real. And you have the power to make those changes. And how you do that is through managing choice. So we've developed mechanisms that allow you to go into our system and to increase the weighting results of carbon emissions to what I would suggest you do is make it on a par with or within 20% of price. Price will still be number one, I get it. I'm not going to tell you to book the most expensive flight for sustainability purposes, but you need to at least account for sustainability in the search weightings, because how we present the results to your travelers, whether it's in Concur or Deem is a Travelport company, the order really matters. If you're the number 1 search result on the page versus the number 5, the fall off is about 40%. And if you're not on that first page, you literally don't exist, because only 8% of our bookings are on the second page of a web scroll down. So placement matters. And where we put this stuff today is entirely, we look at the cheapest ones first, because that's what most of corporate policies are set up for. You have the power to change your policies and to make your policies reflect the environmental impact. And that's where search matters. So we have a system. I'm sure all of the TMCs you're working with have systems. You as a TMC need to develop better intuitive systems for you to be able to allow travel managers to go in. And we have a complex way of doing it where you can actually favor based on carbon emissions. But the easier way is just to select a green option, a middle option, or a I don't care option. And you can have various ways of shaming the I don't care option if you want. But the point is, give people the tools to easily make those decisions. So that's the influence part. Now, finally, I want to talk a second about the end-to-end view of a trip. Because today, we look at air, then we look at rail, then we look at hotel, then we look at airport transfers, and we don't put all these things together. And more we're going to have to. So we have, in the industry, most TMCs have comprehensive rail search programs, but we don't interline those with air. So in France, it is illegal, there's actually plenty of gray in this law, that allow to connect from an international flight to a domestic flight. So they're going to require you to fly into Paris or Nice or Lyon and then connect via a train. And Air France already has several SNCF trains with AF flight numbers. The problem is, for most consumers, they don't understand that means you got to change stations, or there may be an hour transfer time from Charles de Gaulle to Gare du Nord. And so how do you protect that user if there's a misconnection? How do you deal with traffic, which you don't normally, when you're changing planes in an airport, you don't deal with traffic issues or rush hour. So all of these things need to happen to give you an end-to-end view of a trip. And what we're building is a full interline capability between air and rail, so that when you set up a search, it'll say you can connect via rail, you can connect via air. Here's the carbon advantages of rail. Here's the time differences of rail. Here's the advantages and disadvantages, so you can make those choices. But what we're really doing that's cool is developing mechanisms to protect the consumer from a misconnect. That's the big one, is my flight is late, so I missed my train. I want to be automatically booked on the next train. I want a notification as to where the train is, and vice versa for air. And traditionally in our industry, if it's not on my company's stock, I wash my hands of it. And we can't have that. We're going to have responsibility taken to allow these transfers to take place, and then integrate that into hotel and car information. Finally, there's all the issues around traveler well-being, which is also a thing. Is consumers impacted by weather-related issues or environmental-related issues? Since we're tracking all of those things, how can we take traveler well-being issues and inform consumers of that? Potential travel disruptions, routing them around travel disruptions ahead of time, and starting to think about how we can use those events to help educate consumers about the impact of what they're doing. So I'll leave you with these 3 things to think about. These are the things that, kind of summarize what I've talked about: informing, integrating, and neutralizing. And I would ask all of you, this is what if we want to have an impact, we can go talk about SAF all day long. We can dance dance around some tree. But these are the things you can actually do that matter. Inform the subscriber. Come up with a common standard way of saying, this is the impact of your flight. Not telling them how many pounds or kilograms of carbon were emitted. Tell them in realistic terms how they can do better. Here is your best option. So informing subscribers, but helping them make decisions easier without being experts. Number 2 is integrate. Integrate air and rail. Right now, demand integrated air and rail, where when you do a search, you get both options, and those options work together in some non-stupid way. Just something halfway rational is what I'm looking for there. Then finally, neutralize. How do we give consumers the power to make the right decisions, to fly new aircraft, to use SAF when it's available, to use lower emissions aircraft and planes and engines when available, and ultimately pick offset options that are real and have an impact, that are not just a scam. So that's kind of what I think we need to do. And while I may be a little bit cynical or I don't know, not the most inspirational anti pro-environment person in the world, I think that it's important that we tell the truth, we're transparent about what we're doing, because we're going to lose consumer trust if we don't. So let's drive forward on harmonized sustainability data that is standardized. Please don't use proprietary information. Use open source standards. Support reporting requirements for all of your TMCs, all of your customers. We have real-time reports. You can go in and see exactly the emissions of all your corporate travelers on a month-to-month basis in real time. You all need to offer that, and you all need to use that to really see what the impacts are. Provide clarity on staff and use it, but let's not get overly enamored with things that are 20 years from happening, and provide the tools to you, the travel manager and the TMC, to be able to do your job. So that's it. Thank you very much. We do have a few minutes for questions if there are any. If not, we can, I'll give you back 8 minutes of your life to go do research on sustainability. Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I love that fact that you're real about it. But how are we going to manage, and maybe this might be a rhetorical question, is when it comes down to the bottom line, you have these road warriors and people on the road, it comes down to convenience and time and money. And now you want them to shift, everyone to shift thinking to say, okay, now we want you to spend a little more money, take a little bit more time away from your family. I'm on the road, 250 days of the year, and but I want you to save the environment. But let's take time away from your family and take 3 hours longer on the trip and whatever. So I mean, like, there's this balance, and that's what I don't see coming together. Like, I love that you're real on this whole sustainability, and I think this is all a great cause. But when it comes to it, when I'm traveling, I'm like, let me get there the fastest. Let me get there, and it often always, like, this is all great, but now let's come back to here because I need to get home. I got to feed my dog. I got to go to the kids' play. Like, all of that comes into play, and it seems like those aren't being calculated in this.
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And the goal is, so you have two approaches based on what you just said. One is guilt people into doing things that are inconvenient and bad for them, or make the difference between the sustainable and unsustainable choice as little as possible. I vote for the latter. So if we can make it such that you can make a sustainable choice that doesn't mean you're away from your family any longer, or doesn't require a 6-hour layover, or doesn't require you sit in the back in the middle like this next to the bathroom, which is a great experience, by the way, then we can make progress. But we have to help the airlines do that. And I think that, from an economic perspective, there are tax credits, there are things that we can do from a corporate perspective that don't involve inconvenience to the traveler, but do direct dollars towards educating a consumer that if I take the 4 o'clock instead of the 2 o'clock, the impact is a 20% reduction in emissions. I still may say, you know what, I need to get home. I've got to feed my dog. Environmentally friendly dog food, of course. I was at a GBTA, this is a little side story, I was at a GBTA conference one time, it was like 2 years ago, and we were talking about sustainability of air travel, and the main headline was, it was a vegan lunch. That was the main thing. You might have been at that one. And I know that everyone was going to this booth that was serving roast beef sandwiches because, and it's like, it's not helping. I mean, so we have to think about how we can make sustainability an easy decision, not a hard one. I don't believe the right answer is to tell your road warrior traveler to make their lives more horrible. But they should know that it's an option to make their lives more horrible if they want. But we want to find ways to give them equivalent travel experiences that are sustainable. And I think that is possible if we can encourage newer aircraft, if we can encourage an end-to-end understanding, at least they know they're making the decision. Because right now, your traveler doesn't even know the impact of their decisions.
That's the problem. I think there's competing agendas.
Mm-hmm.
How do you compete with cost savings in a world where inflation is going up against sustainability? I think those are, and then also you have the ability to measure travel policies, and how do you compare, like, this employee who's a road warrior, it's like, okay, now we've got this green initiative, which is fine, but now, like, oh wait, this company here is going to pay me more money, I get to fly business class because they don't care about that or whatever. I mean, like,
It's just a matter of...
If we're not all doing it, it's like, then you start losing
Right.
talent.
Exactly right. It's that fragmentation of the experience and a lack of commonality that is the issue. But every corporation has budget. They have more money to spend than they know where to spend it when it comes to environmentalism. And they spend it on scams like SAF instead of spending it, not SAF, SAF's not a scam, sorry, on offsets. SAFs are good. Let me confuse you. But if I want to spend money on something, I can take that money and I can direct it towards aircraft that are more sustainable, or to help airlines get to a better place where you have that equivalency option. But instead, we spend it on tree planting schemes and things like that that don't necessarily have as big of an impact. I was getting the wave that I'm almost done, but I think we have time for one more question if anyone wants to. If not, okay. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I really appreciate it.